Hello and welcome to OSW Daily, where each day we discuss the current topics that are on everyone's lips, what we think we need to know all about work, workplace productivity, employee engagement. Each day we bring a guest who has great insights that we lean on, and we discuss those topics and sort of get their views, get their opinions, and just have a really casual conversation. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, first off, who is the guest? Ryan Anderson, Herman Miller, great friend, great thought leader in the space, all around, obviously, workplace technology, and also... Daily, where each day we discuss the current topics that are... There we go. Give me 2 seconds. All about workplace productivity, employee engagement. Each day we bring a guest who has great insights that we lean on, and we discuss them. All right, technical difficulties. There we go. This is the problem when you try new software, and these are the things that happen. So we're going to talk about the future of Office. Trying to get Ryan's perspective on what the future of Office is. Enterprise work from home programs. Many organizations are discussing this at the moment. They want to find and understand what actually is and what they should be doing with these work from home programs. And then obviously over the weekend, Friday it probably broke, Microsoft has let employees work from home permanently. And while this is a teasing, tantalizing title, we're going to discuss, well, actually, what does this really mean whenever we get into the nuts and bolts of what we're doing. So before we go any further, I just want to welcome Ryan Anderson. How you doing, Ryan? Apologies for the little disruptions there, but that was kind of interesting when we do these things,
Hey, that's technology, man. Thanks for having me. It's so good to see you on a Monday morning.
I know, man. What a better way to start the week, like just chatting with you all about this stuff. And, it's we were back and forth yesterday just to try to sort of figure out, okay, what content should we talk about? And you put forward 2 really nice pieces I think is really relevant. And then obviously I think we're going to wrap all that up with the conversation on Microsoft. But so how have you been, mate? How's everything in your life?
Good. I'm fortunate. It's a beautiful time in Michigan. So bracing for the winter. But fall is beautiful. Herman Miller's doing well. I've recently taken over a new role as head of global research, which I love. I started my career at Herman Miller in research, and what an awesome, fascinating time. So it's good.
Yeah, no, that's great, man. It's great to hear. And I think about you and I think about research, and I just think, well, that's it fits you nicely, right? And the ability then to really sort of dig in with you and some of these important points that we have and we want to discuss today. So you shared a piece. What's the future of the office, and what does that mean? And sort of, you sort of say the challenges of 2020 have precipitated many questions about the purpose of the workplace. And sort of, whenever you think about the workplace and you think about the challenges we're going through, and as you think about sort of what that may mean, what sort of things come to mind for you whenever you think about these challenges?
Well, I think right now, the challenge that almost everybody I know in the facilities, real estate, workplace world is being able to address really fundamental questions being asked among business leaders around what's the future, what's its purpose. It's a challenge, but it's awesome. I mean, it's a great opportunity, and it's one that we need to seize collectively, because I think so many of us have been trying to elevate the role of workplace, the understanding of workplace and its strategic value among CEOs, CFOs, CHROs, and others for years. And the good news is now they're saying, okay, we've all been working remotely for an extended period of time. It seems to be working generally well. What does this mean for the office? So it's a good challenge. We need to jump out there collectively and answer this and give I think, a very forward-looking point of view, and push the thinking of our leaders collectively around the world to help them understand workplace as something beyond what it once was.
And what do you think, sort of, obviously through the piece, there are, you do note the piece notes the challenges that are there. What do you think are the most prominent right now?
A couple things. One I mentioned, which is that there's been a pretty seismic shift in the belief that working remotely outside of the office is possible. And by the way, it is. We should acknowledge that an office isn't a prerequisite for being productive. You can be productive in a number of places. You have to begin to think about workplace differently in terms of how it's still extremely valuable even when people can work anywhere. The other thing probably has to do with densification strategies. I mean, a lot of organizations have viewed workers in kind of a binary way. You're either an office worker or you're a remote worker in the past, and we need to move beyond that, because in an effort to optimize real estate costs, a lot of organizations pursue densification strategies. And if you believe that everybody who's an office worker needs a desk, what a lot of offices have ended up with, not all, but a lot, are very densely planned floor plates that are full of desks. And if you look at our utilization data as an example, we've been using sensors for 11 or 12 years to measure utilization studies or longer term longitudinal work. Basically, you can see the utilization of those desks going down year over year over year. So there's this equation of like more desks per square foot, worse utilization, which, I mean, that translates to a poor ROI on occupancy investments as far as I'm concerned. And so now is a chance to reevaluate. If people can do their emails somewhere else, they can do their expense reports somewhere else, do floor plates really need to be like that?
Yeah, and you started all that off with productivity. And it's something I think many organizations are trying to really get to the nuts and bolts of it. Are people more productive in this environment? And I think most people, the perception individuals have is they do feel more productive. But I've actually started asking people an additional question. Do you feel more productive? Is your perception more productive at home or in the office? And most people feel they're more productive in basically, like you said, that heads down work at home. And then I follow up with another question. Do you feel your career has developed during this time, or do you think it's been hindered? And it's really interesting, you get the inverse, right? So people feel productive, but they actually really are concerned that their career hasn't developed as well or as what they had anticipated for the year of 2020. I don't know what you've thought. Have you given that thought? Or
Yeah, and we've been doing our own research, and we've also been exploring what is or isn't working in terms of working from home. Our point of view is this: that distributed working is the new norm, and that begins with empowered employees. So we would actually recommend to organizations, give your employees the choice to work from where they want on a given day, which might sound a bit presumptuous. I want to acknowledge from a furniture company, but having said that, we're saying that because it's based on research, not just ours, but others, and we think it's really best for organizations. In fact, Gallup organization has been tracking engagement relative to location for some time now, and I think as recently as January came out and said the highest levels of disengagement among employees are those that work almost exclusively from the office or almost exclusively outside of the office. They pointed out that those employees that have the freedom to choose where they want to work had the highest levels of engagement, and most, if given the choice, would come in about 2 days a week, which is pretty consistent with what we found. And so that means that we can let people determine where they're most productive. And I think if you ask people, hey, do you want to work exclusively from home? They'll say, heck no. Do you want to work from the office every day, be there at 8 a.m.? Heck no. Give people the choice. If you hired them, you should trust them. And then if that choice exists, you can probably begin to think about saving on your overall real estate costs. I mean, you can shrink up that portfolio a bit, not be so focused on dense desk planning, but instead reinvest some of those savings in two things. One would be better on-demand workplaces that support the activities not easily supported from home, and we can talk about what those are. And the second thing would be reinvesting in employees' home offices, just to make sure that they are productive and healthy and safe on the days when they're from home. So I think there's a win-win in that equation: more engaged employees, better return on occupancy investments, and better health and productivity all around.
yeah, you used an interesting word there. Use trust, right? It's the employee. Probably most employees, right? They know they're hired to do a specific job, a specific role, perform certain tasks. And is the trust, will the organization, will their manager have the trust that they're going to be able to execute on that and deliver and be a team player in that environment? And I think that's a tough thing to reconcile for a lot of people, especially those managers who have excelled in the office environment, but perhaps are maybe don't feel they have the same control or the same, I don't know, confidence, if you want, right, in the team and what the team are going to do. So it's a tough thing to balance.
It's a tough thing to balance, but it's critical. And I hope that 6 months or more of extended remote work has caused people to move beyond presenteeism as a way of measuring productivity, because it's not great for the organization, to be honest, to have managers that say, well, as long as I see you and as long as your shirt is nicely ironed, that I'm pretty sure you're performing well. We've known that that's not true for a long time. So we need to move beyond that a bit. and look at the experience I think that we've had over the last 6 months, and try to imagine what the narrative is going to be moving forward. And what I mean by that is, let's just say we're in a post-vaccine or a post really good treatment kind of world, and then as a manager, you're saying to your employees, "Hey, we've missed you. Come on back to the workplace. We'd love to see you." I think the reaction will be great. If the narrative is, "And I want you there every day, and I don't want you to work from home anymore," I have a feeling that's going to be received as somewhat draconian or lacking in trust. I think the better narrative is, "Hey, I can't wait to see you, can't wait to be present with you. And we've all learned how to work in new ways, so we're trusting you to figure out where you can be most productive on a given day." And we have to remember that people's work from home experiences are so incredibly diverse. I mean, there is not one work from home experience. Some people will be able to focus and concentrate at home beautifully. Others will have little kids or a partner taking a Zoom call 2 feet away. They're going to desperately need an office to go focus or to socialize. I mean, it varies. And so each individual, if they're empowered to know, okay, I know what I've got to do today or in the course of the week, and these are my choices. And it could be the office, it could be corporate office, it could be a satellite office, it could be my home office or a flex space. As long as they know what's available and what they've got to do, then I think the future lies in trusting them to get their work done and being able to measure it in a way that isn't just about whether or not they're sitting in a certain place.
So the flexibility tends to be key, right? And I think that's what you're saying. I think also going back to what you said about Gallup, I think that's what Gallup is saying: the flexibility to empower employees, let employees feel they have the autonomy to choose what they need to be and where they need to be. And obviously, the important thing to manage is how do you ensure the team are up in the same way, so there isn't an imbalance there. Because I think Gallup also did a study, I think it's 2017, that says when the teams come together, they have to come together every 2.5 2 to 3 days, I think, is what they actually said when they come together in the office.
Yeah.
I tell you what my big concern is: everybody wants to come in Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, right? And that's just like, oh my goodness, how do you manage that? And that's where technology is going to come in, and obviously being able to provide tools to employees to be able to manage that, so that the real estate and facilities team can sort of manage some of those things. But you did talk about some of the ways to mitigate some of these challenges, and I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, it depends on which challenge you're trying to mitigate. But for me, I think the key would be understanding demand, basically. And I know you in your work have really thought through a lot of the data analytics around this. But generally, we see three things. There's probably more, but let's just start with three things as a way to help evolve existing work environments, to help teams and individuals who maybe have more freedom to find the resources and the experiences they need in the office. One has to do with social connections and socialization. I mean, it's really that ability to interact with your extended network, the whole group of employees beyond maybe the 20 that you might have a Zoom or a Teams call with in the course of a week. That is really critical. It's critical to feeling like you have a sense of belonging. It's critical to the culture. It's also a prerequisite to collaboration, and it gets back to trust in this case. Trust and this feeling of connection among employees. The second has to do with focus, which I talked about before. This gets kind of deep, but the more that teams are distributed, the more that technology will support asynchronous collaboration, meaning if you and I were to work on a presentation or something like that, it's possible we might be on a video call for 2 hours to do it, but it would be very inefficient. Chances are you'd create a document, I'd jump in there and I'd add to it, then you'd add to it. So it's asynchronous, and that's just one example of how collaboration is essentially spreading itself out into more individual versus group times, which, believe it or not, can move much faster, particularly across time zones. And so once again, even though it's focus, concentrative places within the work environment, it also is a prerequisite to supporting team collaboration if you can't focus at home. And then the last are what I would call immersive team experiences or immersive collaboration. And by that, I mean the instances where teams don't need to get together for an hour, but where they need to get together for a day or 2 days or a week. And if we look as an example to 100% remote companies, and there's a handful of fairly successful ones out there. I'm thinking of like 37 Signals, who makes Basecamp, Automatic, who makes WordPress. They still get their people together a lot. In fact, 37 Signals has an office, even though they call themselves 100% remote. And instead of doing offsites, they do onsites. It's very common for work team leaders to say, okay, we're going to be together for these 3 days this month, or we're going to be together every 2 weeks for this event. And when you've got all of these different teams looking to have those good experiences, and yes, you're right, scheduling becomes really important, so you need technology to support it. What you end up with is a space that's deeply desired, on demand, a cultural hub. And it's kind of interesting. I mentioned earlier that you could potentially shrink up the overall real estate portfolio in an era of distributed work. The more desirable those experiences, the more demand, the more we might find that counterbalances it a bit over time. But you can be sure that you're building out a portfolio that's heavily used, as opposed to one that's just kind of a build it and hope that they'll show up kind of approach, which I know most people wouldn't say that they've done in the past, but because the work has been mobile and the employee, whether we've given them permission technically or not in the past, gets to choose where they work, that dynamic has been underway for a while.
Yeah, and there's a couple of things I want to touch on there. So, I mean, those companies that do bring people together, do you have an insight? And if you don't, it's fine. So when they come together for those 2, 3 days, are they coming together to work? Are they coming together to be social? Are they coming together, for something else? Well, do you know? What's your perception? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I do think it's for work, but again, it's a broadened view of productivity, just as you indicated earlier. So is catching up on what different projects are happening in different parts of the company part of being productive? Yes. Is connecting with coworkers and seeing how they're doing and helping them to feel more engaged with one another part of being productive? Yes. It's very similar to what many of us have enjoyed in a good offsite in the past, but as I mentioned, it's happening on site. And so the need for team spaces, project spaces, neighborhoods to live in for days on end is actually increased. But yeah, I think it's a little bit of all the above.
And if you give it much thought, so obviously, there are opportunities at the moment for companies to reduce their real estate. But then given what you said, we may need more space because actually these collaboration spaces are a lot bigger. And therefore, we may just eliminate some desks to create these type of hubs. Have you given much thought to strategies of how organizations can look at that to really understand what is the best approach? Because there's very few people coming into the office today. We don't know how that's going to change over the next 6, 12, 18 months. So how do companies think about that, or what questions should they be asking themselves?
Yeah, great question. There's definitely some work that can be done now, and yes, we can support this. We've got tools and consulting teams and others that can help walk organizations through this. But I do think understanding what experiences the workforce is missing the most, basically, is a good place to start. So, like, what is the experience of the average employee within this organization? I shouldn't say average employee. Everybody's above average. But what is happening in terms of remote work, where people are feeling like, oh, there's something I deeply need? And I think we've also got some benchmark data. Leesman's got some excellent data. So I'd start there, and I'd begin with prototyping opportunities to essentially diversify or change up the sort of work settings that exist within a space. Now, if there's some impending lease event where it's like, okay, we've got an opportunity to make a change, you can certainly look at something broader, but I think this is an evolution that can happen over time. So as more employees come in, I think understanding what spaces are in most demand, understanding ways of communicating with them in new ways. I think we've seen tenant experience apps and other technologies, or just good old-fashioned email, playing a really important role in terms of bridging the communication between facilities and real estate teams and the employees of the organization. And over time, basically taking a space that's primarily desks and conference rooms and asking the question, will email and typical project meetings be done elsewhere? If so, let's begin to piece by piece try new sort of work settings, changing a conference room to a project room as an example, see how it goes. Now, if that takes too long, or the team just isn't able to prototype in that way, we certainly can make broader recommendations based on the data available to say, okay, here's a shot at redoing this. But we know that the economy's tight, capital's short. So I do think this incremental approach to testing is useful, and looking at the data to suggest what is or is not in demand is also really helpful. And we've obviously got, as I mentioned before, sensor technology and other tools to be able to really measure demand over time.
Yeah, no, that's great guidance. And I think the biggest challenge is going to be enticing people back to the office to be able to analyze that data. I don't know whether that's something that you're hearing across the industry. It's certainly something I'm hearing, when I talk to my peers. How do we get people back when the time is ready? Because I think, providing employees with the opportunity to choose what they want to do, how do we then change that narrative and allow them to go
Yeah,
back?
I mean, I think organizations can start with teams that are already hoping to see each other, as an example. So opening up the doors and saying, hey, it's now safe, you can come in, will work to an extent. I think the commute plays a huge role in it. If
Mm,
it's taking the train in from Long Island into Midtown, that is a commitment. If you're in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and it's getting in your car and driving a little bit, it's far lower commitment. But I think tapping into groups that want to see each other is a great place to
yeah.
start. So even if it's just giving the discretion to the team leads to say, hey, if your team feels really disconnected, you don't have to come in every day, but we're going to make the space available to you for a day long reconnect, how you doing, a little bit of team building activity, a little bit of strategic planning, whatever. I think seeing teams beginning to find a lot of enjoyment in being together again is a great place to
Yeah.
start. And so I don't know that I would, if it were me, open up the doors and just say, okay, it's open. I would begin to think about reaching out to groups that want to see each other.
That's a great strategy, and perhaps you have to market your space, right? And it's like, how do you think about it? How do you approach that? So it's good. So switching to another piece of content that we sort of been talking about, enterprise work from home programs, because obviously we've talked about that there is going to be this hybrid approach, whatever that looks like, and organizations are probably most organizations, I think it's fair to say, don't have work from home programs, and they're trying to work through these various things. And Herman Miller put together a paper on some of the benefits and actually how to structure these things. So I just want to sort of really, what are your thoughts on whenever you think about work from home programs and how organizations should be approaching this?
Sure. I think they're a really important thing for organizations to consider for what I said before, which is even if an employee is only working a day or two from home a week, the productivity and health benefits of supporting them usually more than justify the investment in time. And there is some risk, ergonomics, other things with having people working from their sofas and beds and on your tables, which I don't need to share that now because everybody's been thinking about it. But I will acknowledge these programs are complex, and they're complex from a variety of reasons. I mean, one is that historically, a lot of organizations have not had facilities and real estate teams that have said home offices are part of our scope of responsibility. We're encouraging, by the way, our customers to embrace it. If I look at how HR and IT and other functions have said, well, we're going to support work wherever it happens, I think it behooves facilities and real estate teams to say the same thing and to basically expand their positive scope of impact. So taking responsibility is part of it. The second thing is being prepared for some of the tax complexities, particularly in North America, but it's true around the world. I would be ready to have somebody from the tax and accounting team on the team to try to figure this out for a couple different reasons. One just has to do with supporting more distributed working. And I would also include HR, by the way, and say, hey, are we changing our remote hiring practices at all? Because if we're hiring more remotely, this is probably something we're going to have to deal with no matter what. But supporting work from home experiences can involve tax implications, like if you have an employee that moves to a state in the US where you don't currently have employees, you may find yourself having to charge sales tax to your
Right.
customers there for the first time. But then there's tax implications more specific to the procurement of technology and furniture. So if I take a look at some of the customers we support, and I'm thankful that we have supported, I think we're at 100 or more customers that have decided to move forward with these programs already. Some will
Mm,
do a reimbursement, so the employee buys it on their corporate card or pays for it, and the company reimburses it. The complexities there that the company now owns those assets and needs to think about depreciation, needs to think about potential retrieval of those assets, needs to think about the implication to their property taxes. Or I've seen the other approach, which is basically the company buys these things and then gives them to these employees as taxable gifts. So yes, the employee will get taxed on the value of them, but they do own these assets now, and it could be a desk or a chair or a better Wi-Fi router or whatever. So there's some
mm,
nuances that each organization has to figure out. But having said that, I think it's well worth it for what I said before. You get
yeah.
more engaged employees if you give them the choice. You have a greater assurance that they're productive and healthy. And so it's something that organizations just kind of need to work through, and we can help. We've been researching this for a while, and we do have experts on how to approach it.
Yeah, and it is important. The wellness side is what people actually don't really think about when you talk about the ergonomics and how that impacts people's performance, especially throughout the day. But I think the biggest challenge, or the biggest question, I think people do believe we need to be doing these things and having these programs out. And you mentioned all the concerns that people have, and I just add another one is governance, right? So what are the legal implications if we move across different jurisdictions and so on and so forth? I just add that bit. But the other piece is, okay, so who should we roll this program out to? Is it those who are only going to be 100% work from home, or those who are going to be in the office 1 day a week, 2 days a week, 3 days a week, 4 weeks? What is that transition, and where does that stop? And I don't know whether you've seen your customers doing, so that you've seen insights into how different people are approaching this.
Yeah, we have. I mean, that's why I think the conversation begins with, to what extent do we want to empower people to work from wherever they'd like.
Mm-hmm.
Traditional telecommuter programs were focused at those that were 100% remote. Even the term telecommuter, as I say, it's a little antiquated these days, doesn't it? But that's what they were called. And
Right.
a lot of IT organizations had already developed ways of giving a headset, a laptop, a keyboard tray, a printer to somebody who was remote. So now I think we've seen the world broaden their view beyond just remote telecommuting to distributed working. And it doesn't have to be the entire employee base, although we do recommend that organizations consider that. But there's different kind of ways of determining to what extent somebody might need support like this. One would be location, right? Their relative location from a corporate office. The other would be the nature of their work. It's a little bit tougher to actually understand this, because sometimes teams work differently than we might think. But a simple survey to just ask, to what extent do you think you can be successful working outside of the office, or to what extent are you interdependent on teammates within the office? That's another really good question. Can help kind of determine what percentage of the workforce you might like to support. But yeah, you have to figure it out before you start, because you need to be judicious in making sure that the policy is equitable.
Yeah, and one company who has made a decision on what they're going to do, and that obviously is Microsoft. They came out over the weekend, and if we take all we have talked about just through this opening conversation, they're almost rolling all that into what was announced last week. The headline is Microsoft will let employees work from home permanently, but actually whenever you start digging into the nuts and bolts, it's like, well, yeah, you can up to 50% of the time, and then if the manager wants to take you beyond that, well, then that's fine, and we'll let you do that too. So I think it's important that individuals really do focus on actually, okay, so what is the headline, what is the underlying things that we need to be thinking about, and then how does that apply? So I don't know what your thoughts are when you heard the news. Obviously there's been a number of organizations that are coming out, and obviously there are some organizations who we really look at and we really take guidance from, and Microsoft, Google are some of those companies. So what was your thoughts when you saw the headline, and how did you react to the article?
I thought it was a good idea, and I think it's the way of the world. There have been, I think, as you mentioned, a variety of organizations that have led the way. I think of Shopify, I think of Google and others, and Microsoft is one. It's a smart move for the reason we discussed. It's also a smart move for one other reason which we haven't discussed, which is there are certain markets where talent is very expensive. And so if I look at Facebook as an example, or Google or Microsoft, I mean, Microsoft's in the greater Seattle area, the other two are in the Bay Area, but by enabling more distributed working, they also have access to a greater pool of talent that may not demand as much in the way of salaries, but it's a win-win. People can live where they want to live, not necessarily where they have to work. And so knowing that Microsoft has offices all over, I think our closest one here in Michigan is in Detroit. I have a feeling what they're doing is really not just providing employees more choice, but further embracing a hub and spoke real estate model, which I think is quickly becoming the norm. I mean, in some ways it already was, but I think it'll just continue to accelerate. And so, like I said before, it's a win-win. I think it was a smart move on their part, and I think we're going to see a majority of companies actually end up this way. The question is just when. Is this something that most organizations are going to adopt in the next 12 months, or is it going to be phased out a little bit longer?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you, and I think it's important that we do follow, we do listen, but also when we see these headlines, right, let's really dig into what are they really saying, and sort of see the guidance. And I think that work from anywhere concept is going to be, we're going to hear more and more from that, obviously as time evolves, and timing, to your point, is like when is this going to happen, and when is the right time to enable people to go back to the office. But I don't know if you were about to say something just then. No.
I'm just going to reinforce, you're right. Today in the media, the reporters write the articles, headline writers write the headline. And the headlines will continue to reinforce this binary. Is remote work sustainable? That assumes it's 100%. Does everybody want to be back to the office? That's 100%. If you look at the smart organizations, you're going to find that it's a hybrid approach that empowers people to work where they want to work.
No, well, Ryan, I think we're just going to wrap it up there because I think that's a beautiful place to finish. I want to thank you for your time. We've went on a little bit longer this morning, folks, but I appreciate you hanging out with us and sticking around. And Ryan, I appreciate your insights, appreciate your views, and it's always great chatting with you. So thank you, man.
Thank you, my friend. Have a great week.
Great. Thank you. And folks, if you have enjoyed the conversation, if you like this channel, please do consider subscribing, do share, leave a comment, give a thumbs up. There'll be links below to connect with Ryan. Please do reach out to him, and also links to the content that we reviewed today. So thank you, appreciate it, and thanks again. Take care. Have a wonderful day.